Hey guys, I'm excited to have with me today my longtime friend Daniel Teater. Daniel is a licensed counselor. He's also the executive director of Live at Peace here in St. Louis. It is a counseling and mediation service that I've worked with personally and professionally. Yeah, Daniel's a wealth of insight. And thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us.
Absolutely, Josh. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the emotional stuff that all of us are dealing with in these circumstances that we're living through right now. Um, there's a lot of practical issues that we've talked about before that all of us are trying to deal with as well. You know, what's work look like for me? What should I do with my money? But part of what makes navigating those questions particularly challenging and difficult is this kind of like this just weird set of circumstances that we're dealing with that are beyond our control, and they've just been dropped in our laps. And my experience in talking with you guys is that you guys, just like me, are experiencing a lot of things like, you know, anxiety, confusion, fear, anger sometimes. And that is coloring how we approach all these other decisions that we have to make, like what should I do with my investment accounts? What's the new normal at work look like for me? What kinds of resources do I have available to me to help my business survive? And how do I even make good decisions? Because I don't know what the future is going to hold. So I thought it might be helpful to have Daniel join us today and talk with us a little bit about those kind of like emotional underpinnings that are involved in all that stuff. So I'm excited. I think this will be helpful for me. I hope that it'll be helpful for you guys too. And Daniel, what I wanted to start with is to kind of just give you kind of like a broad category of question that comes from conversations I've been having with folks. And what I've found is that a lot of the people that I'm talking to, just like I said, we've got a lot of decisions that we have to make right now. But part of what makes that decision-making process extra complicated is that folks who I talk to are telling me, well, Josh, I don't have a job now, or I'm still employed, but I don't know for how long. And even whenever I am able to start working again, I don't even know what work will be like for me.
Right.
And I also have folks who have responsibility maybe for a team at work or for a business that they own, or they have a large amount of responsibility, decision-making role in business. And they're thinking, boy, I've got a lot of things that I'm responsible for, but all of the ways that I would typically make decisions don't apply in this situation because there's so many things that are outside of my control. So there's this large, vague sense of powerlessness and of being active that a lot of people that I talk to are dealing with. So is that something that you have seen in the conversations you're having with folks? And what kind of advice would you have for somebody who's feeling that sense of powerlessness right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last 2 weeks in particular have been, as I've sat with people from Australia to the East Coast to the West Coast, because a lot of what I'm doing now is via video and telephone. I've begun to see the impact across the world. And there are very consistent themes, and the theme of powerlessness is one of them. It's valid and it's universal because it is what is happening. There is a sense of shaking, there's a sense of crisis that has hit, and a crisis has distinct phases to it. And so a lot of the work that I've done with folks is I've sat with them and really started with, you're in a crisis. And as a result of a crisis, there are going to be certain kinds of experiences that go right hand in hand with a crisis experience. And powerlessness is one of the very first kinds of experiences of a crisis, because truly, there are things beyond our control. There are things that are beyond what we're able to, before we could have an effect on our world in a certain way, and there was reliable output. That's all, in a lot of ways, it's gone now. We don't have that anymore. And so there's almost an existential crisis of like, everything I knew and relied upon is now gone. And so often when people experience that sense of powerlessness, anxiety is not far behind because it's like, I feel powerless, I don't have control. And the emotion that often alerts me to my lack of control, that there's a threat to control, is anxiety. And so what I've been doing with folks is sitting and saying, listen, you are responding normally to the fact that you're in crisis. And right now, I would walk people through the phases of a crisis. And depending on where people are at and depending on when they went into quarantine, sometimes they're more in the adjustment phase of the crisis, which is they're starting to find new rhythms. They've found a new normal. It doesn't mean it's over and you've reached resolution, because we don't know when that's going to happen yet. But there's the ability to start making adjustments in the midst of the crisis. But for some of you, maybe even you're still in the shock withdrawal phase. You feel foggy, you feel disoriented, you feel that sense of powerlessness, that everything that you knew how to do is suddenly gone. And what I would want to do is encourage you to say you're normal, that's a valid experience. Everyone else is experiencing the same thing at maybe different stages because of when we experience the crisis. But you're normal. That's my first message. But secondarily, related to powerlessness, when you're feeling that stuck and that overwhelmed, the very first step is often to focus, almost begin to narrow in your focus on something very small and actionable. Because when you stay in the big picture, it can feel amorphous, diffuse, confusing, and foggy. That's why it's almost like you have to get everything down to very tiny little actionable steps and say, what is one thing I do have power to do today? And it could actually just be as simple as that, saying, okay, today I'm going to wake up and because of my exercise routine, I'll give you my own personal example. One of the things that went out was the gym. And I know it might sound simple, but it was a way for me of navigating and regulating my own anxiety, my own mood, helping myself stay within a certain kind of frame of mind, getting those endorphins. Well, that's gone. So it took me about a week of being like, what am I going to do? And finally, it was like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to just run. And I'm going to start running. And so it might sound very simple and basic, but that's normal when you're in a crisis. And once you take that next action step, it expands your horizons to be able to see other action steps in front of you. But you often really do have to start small and say, what do I have the ability to be responsible for and take a next action step on right now? So I think that's the first two pieces: is you're normal, you're in a crisis, and then kind of limit your focus to something you can control and you are responsible for, and take that next step. The third thing I just would add, Josh, that I think is really important, is that sense of powerlessness is often connected to loss. You see, we're suddenly experiencing all of these losses all at the same time. And the crazy part for me is I cognitively knew this was happening about the second week of March. And I was like, I'm in a crisis right now. And I know that this is probably what I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing a lot of loss. But that didn't mean I did the emotional work necessary to help my heart stay in a place where I felt like I could still regulate it in a helpful way. It took me about a week of being able to go and catch my breath on a Saturday, actually, and being like, okay, I'm actually processing through the losses that have happened. I lost my autonomy. I lost my ability to have freedom to do some of the things I like doing. I've lost my ability to even have my kids are now with me, 4 kids, 12 to 5. They're with me every day, and I love my kids. And yet I'm not the best teacher, and now I'm their teacher. And so there's all these things that are piling up all at the same time. And so part of, I think, being able to process the powerlessness is being able to acknowledge the impact of a loss, and being able to allow yourself permission to grieve the loss and the pain that you're experiencing, to be able to then free you up to take those next action steps. So those are 3 things that just come to mind as you talk about that specific piece of feeling that powerlessness, Josh.
That's really good stuff. And it makes me think, on that second piece, it makes me think of a conversation I had just recently with a buddy of mine. And we were talking about the tried and true hunting advice to aim small, miss small.
Yes.
And this is a situation where that's a really helpful little rubric to have in your head, when you, and it's tricky too, because staying focused on those things you do have some ability to exercise control over is difficult, because for me at least, as soon as I start to have a sense of like, okay, this is the thing that I can do today. I have the capability to get this thing accomplished. And then something will kind of like swoop in, that's evidence of my lack of control. And all of a sudden I'm kind of like,
Spinning.
Yeah, exactly. So it's something that has to happen over and over and over again. Well, so I'll tell you another thing that I thought about whenever you're sharing that, Daniel, is for some of the folks that I'm talking to, well, I'll give you an example of a real conversation that I've had a couple of times, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll fail it slightly. All right. So I had a game plan this year for my business, or for the goals I was going to accomplish at work.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was even like a fitness goal that I had for
Yep.
myself this year. And now the rug has been pulled out from under me when it comes to accomplishing that goal. And I am frustrated and angry. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, a coworker of mine, or a neighbor of mine, has a family member who is on a ventilator right now, and they've actually got the virus. So I'm frustrated and I'm angry at what I lost, what I'm not going to be able to do. I also feel super ambivalent and guilty because I'm frustrated. Meanwhile, other people are actually dying.
Yep.
So I'm angry and I don't have a right to feel angry. Is
Yep.
that something that you're encountering? And what would you have to say about that
Yeah.
ambivalence?
Yeah. Again, you're normal. That is so normal. In fact, a lot of what you just expressed, I could give illustrations and examples too of people immediately, and I'll disguise and mask things for confidentiality's sake, but talking to someone in charge of an organization and basically like, yeah, I actually know someone who was in their mid 30s, very similar kind of span of life, you know, a parent to many children and gone. And and so there was a sense of, I can't give myself permission to be sad, disappointed, grieve, and be angry about what I'm losing in this, because the loss and suffering of other people is so much higher and bigger. And so who am I to complain? And so what I would want to speak into that, and how I spoke into it, is to say, you know, we're not invited to live in a comparative way with other people's stories. Our story is our story is our story. And the loss that we experience, the loss that my children are experiencing for themselves, is a true and genuine loss. It is the absence of something that should be there. And the experience of that is grief and pain and heartache. And so even if I would look at it from my vantage point and think like, wow, it feels different than the losses I'm experiencing as an adult. In their story, if I could put myself in their experience, the pain is still the pain. It's still a valid expression and a protest to something that suddenly is gone that should be present. And so I would want to say, listen, your story is your story. And I would want people to hold two realities. One is, people are going to need your tears because they're experiencing loss and grief and heartache. So for the person whose parent is in, or a dad or a mom or a family member is in the hospital on a ventilator, you need to be able to grieve and weep with them. And you also need to have permission to be able to say your loss is a true and genuine experience of pain too. And both can be equally true without having to be compared to each other. And so that would be what I would want to invite people in, is to really look at and to live within their own story, and to acknowledge that, you know, in a hospital, they often have that pain scale, you know, 0 to 5, 1 to 5. Maybe it's 1 to 10. I think it's 1 to 10. And sometimes even with children's hospitals, they'll have different smiley faces and, you know, the frowning face and screaming face. The point is, it's a subjective analysis to help you measure what your internal experience is. And in the same way, when you experience pain, it is a subjective experience. And so the invitation then is to say, what's your pain level? And it's not what's their pain level, it's what's your pain level. And then reflect back that to me so we can then help you navigate that pain in a more helpful way for you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, that's great. And it makes me think of the document that you shared with me. So
Mm-hmm.
Daniel had shared a document with me that it's designed to do just that, to kind of help you take inventory of your own experience. And we were talking earlier about how that can be a tricky thing to do, even for people
Mm-hmm.
that are like smart together with it people.
Yep.
And sometimes smarter and more together and more with it you are, the more challenging it can be to hit that pause button long
Yes.
enough tell what's going on inside of yourself. But so Daniel has shared, it's a simple, I think it's 3 pages, but it's a document. I have a PDF version of it. that can help if you feel like you like, a little bit of assistance in being able to just kind of
Mm-hmm.
tune into what's going on inside of yourself. So
Yeah.
maybe by way of wrap up, Daniel, so you had talked with me about the kind of the three stages of navigating your own
Mm-hmm.
anxiety.
Yeah.
Could you
Yeah.
share that with us?
Absolutely. One of my favorite authors, he says, no one ever told me that that grief felt so much like fear. And so one of the things that that's C.S. Lewis in A Grief Observed, the idea that first and foremost, you may be experiencing an intensification of anxiety, and in part, what that might be due to is not only the rapidly changing powerlessness and circumstantial change, but also the losses that have been piling up. And so some of the work I think before us is to do that grief work and to allow ourselves to feel that pain and to acknowledge that even beneath some of the anxiety, there may be some things that need our attention and our care because there is pain present. And so to speak then to how do you regulate anxiety, anxiety I think I've heard it said that it's the most contagious emotion. And so whoever you're serving, if you're not attending to your own anxiety or your anxious reactions, it's going to transmit onto other people. So I just want to hold that out there for you. This is very important for you to do your work so that you can be more present for other people. I would just break it down three quick things. First, attend. Attend means you have to learn how to pay attention to the ways anxiety shows up in your body. Anxiety is an unconscious and automatic response to a threat. And so the reality is it's going to happen whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And so when your body feels under threat, the alarm system goes off, your fire alarm goes off. And so you need to know your body's signals of anxiety. One leadership podcast I listen to, he always invites people he has on the show to just respond to this question. How do you experience anxiety? As a tightening of the chest, racing thoughts, or an upset stomach? And the question itself immediately makes people think about the physiological reaction to anxiety. So first and foremost, know your anxiety template. Attend to your body and notice the signals of anxiety. And then as you become aware of how it shows up for you in your body, you need to practice attunement. That means gentleness and care and compassion towards whatever is happening in your heart. And so sometimes it's quite difficult and challenging to attend to emotional states with that care and that compassion and curiosity. But I do believe some of those underlying things that drive anxiety, if we're able to offer care and that kind of attunement to those impacts, it actually begins to reduce the level of intensity. When people, particularly like kids, they experience an intense disruption of relationship where they experience loss or suffering, the relational intervention of a parent coming and bringing soothing presence helps regulate the emotional state of distress. And so we need to actually be able to practice that for ourselves internally as adults, and also rely on other people to enter in and help care for us too, because we're interdependent beings. So attend, attune, and then contain. Contain just means essentially figuring out regulation strategies to help you navigate the anxiety. So if you don't know several things that you can do to help you regulate it when you feel flooded, I would recommend thinking through that today. And for myself, for example, I love basketball. I love just shooting hoops. It brings me to a place of regulation very quickly because I did it as a kid. I know it sounds odd potentially, but it's something I found that like if I go and do that and I'm feeling flooded, it really helps me reset myself. Or going on a walk, going for a run, journaling. There's all sorts of things I think you can do to practice regulation of your body that I think that containment piece is really important. So those three pieces, I would just say practically, pay attention to how it shows up. When it does show up, really practice kindness. Don't try to harshly get rid of it and be like, I shouldn't feel this way, but instead with kindness and with gentleness, explore and say, I am feeling this way and it's a hard experience. And then practice some sort of regulation behavior that helps bring you back and not feel so flooded. So those are three steps I would say would be helpful to practice as you learn how to regulate.
That's great. Awesome. Attend, attune, and contain. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to share
Absolutely.
your thoughts thoughts with us. This is super helpful. I know it's very helpful for me. My
Mhm.
expectation is going to be helpful for all the folks that'll get a chance to watch this as well. Guys, if you are interested in that document, I'd happily share it with you. So just shoot me a text or an email, and I can
Mhm.
share that same anxiety inventory document that Daniel
Mhm.
sent me. So please let me know if you have anything on your mind, or if there's anything else that I can help you with. And take care. We'll be in touch. We'll talk soon. Have a good day.